Hey guys, I wanted to put this little video together, not spend a lot of time. If you guys need help with your project, especially part four, we will be working on that soon. So first of all, before you begin anything, if you have not completed your 2.1 homework, um, make sure that you've done that. You can't understand the project if you don't do that. So stop the video, go do your 2.1. Make sure you watch those videos because we'll go over almost all of the answers in those videos. If you haven't done that, then please do not do the project yet. Once you've done that, please make sure you've read through all the directions. The directions are most important. Read the front page and start working on part one. I chunked it up this time so that you can look at part one and that's what you go to work on. Then you look at part two and that's what you go to work on. If you're at home and you can't print this out, please label each part on pieces of paper whenever you submit it. And make sure you look at the rubric before you submit it. Otherwise, you may get points off. And if I don't see this before the grading deadline is Friday, November 6th, then you could be screwing yourself over. So first part is pretty self-explanatory. The first three parts are pretty self. We've done it already. If you did your 2.1 homework, the first part is to create a Pert chart. Make sure that you are looking at the activities here, that you have all 12 of these activities. These are all the activities that you should have on your Pert chart. Use the abbreviations whenever you are putting them on there. That will be very, very helpful. And you don't have to write all these out. Make sure that you include a legend that's part of the directions. Well, if you're creating your Pert chart, how do we know which activities can start right away? Well, the ones that have no prerequisites are the ones that can start right away. So these should be the ones connected to start. And as you continue going through your Pert chart, just be mindful of the prerequisites. Once SP, AI, and BD on your chart, then look at C. Is SP a prerequisite for something else? Yeah, it's a prerequisite for two other things. So these should be pointing to this next activity. This should be pointing to this next activity, and so on. So all of these prerequisites will always be pointing to what they're a prerequisite for. If you have activities that are no longer prerequisites for something else, then they should be pointing to finish. Make sure that you have a start and finish box on your on your chart. All right. So next part is your timeline. Just remember that when we create this timeline, that you, again, use your notes to help you out. Take a look at what it is that you are setting up. We know that if I'm going to use this as an example, these three can start right away because they're connected to start. So they start in hour or week 0, and then they go as long as they last. Keep in mind that activities like activity D right here, D has to wait for both C and B to be finished. Okay, so D cannot even start until both of them finish. Even though B finishes first, C doesn't finish until hour, week 6, or whatever this is, and then that's why D can start after 6. Okay, and so you're going to be using that information to build your timeline on part 2. Let's create your timeline. Next part will bring you to part 3, answering some questions. These are just like the questions in your notes, as well as your quiz. Use the timeline to help you out. The timeline will pretty much, if you set your timeline up correctly, it'll pretty much answer all of your questions for you. This brings me to part 4. This is the one that's kind of like a critical thinking part. First and foremost, read all the directions, please. If you don't read the directions straightforward, it's going to be very hard to understand. I know reading is hard for some of you guys. Please read the directions. What part 4 is asking you to do is it's telling you that there are different people working on different parts. I'm going to use this as an example right here. And there are basically 3 team members working on every activity. This Pert chart doesn't match up this here for your project. I'm just going to use it as an example. And it tells you that you can move people around to kind of save you some time. Every time you take somebody away from an activity, it adds an hour to that activity. But every time that you add somebody into a new activity, you reassign a team member, it takes an hour less to do that activity, or a week less. I think it's in weeks. So for example, let's look at A and C here. A and C but let's say they both have 3 people working on it. So there's 3 people working on it here. There's 3 people working on it here. Well, what happens if I take one person away from A and move it over to C? Okay, I'm going to move one person over there. Well, now I have, I'm going to do this. Now I have only 2 people working here, and I have 4 people working on it over here. Well, what does that do to our number of weeks? Well, this is going to make this longer. That's going to make it 5 weeks. And it's going to make this shorter, which is also going to be 5 weeks. Well, guess what we just did? We now moved the ability for E to start at week 5 instead of week 6. Prior to that, E had to wait until C was done, which is at week 6. But now they both end in the same week. E can slide back earlier week 5, which means all of these can slide back a week earlier, which means my whole entire thing falls back and tries to finishes a week earlier. Remember that the idea here is that let's take people out of non-critical activities and put them into critical activities. This particular graph, if you remember from this assignment, the critical path was this one right here. So I basically took somebody out of a non-critical activity. I made that critical activity that non-critical activity longer, so I can make that critical activity shorter. Find other ways where you can move. Let's say I want to move somebody from here to make that even shorter. This will go down a week, this will go up a week, but that'll be okay. The catch is that when you're looking at making these movements, you can only move people within their own team. So like you can only move a computer programmer into another computer programmer activity. You can only move an engineer in another engineer activity. And you can only move a technician into another technician activity. So again, this will make a lot more sense once you're done with your PERT chart, but that's the catch here. You can only move them here. Make sure to read those directions. You'll tell me on that part 4, hey, I reassigned one person from activity A to activity C, and that chart is on your page, part 4 there. And then when you're done, create a real quick new PERT chart to show us what's the new amount of weeks. It should be less than what you did before. So that's your help video. Hopefully you use this to help you finish your project. Let me know if you guys have any questions.